When I found out I was infertile, I didn't feel much at first. It was like the news didn't fully register, or maybe I was just numb from hearing the same thing from every doctor. Sarah squeezed my hand tightly in that sterile office room, but all I could do was nod along. I might have even muttered a casual, "All right, thanks," like the guy had just given me bad directions, instead of shattering our future plans. Sarah, on the other hand, was already blinking away tears by the time we stepped out of the building. The thing about my family is that kids are everything. We're your standard big American family with close ties and strong opinions. My dad, Jeff, retired a few years ago after working as a mechanic for nearly 4 decades. He's one of those men who can fix anything with his hands but is about as emotionally expressive as a brick. He's the kind of guy who prefers spending his days in the backyard with a grill and a beer instead of giving long pep talks. My mom, Diane, was a nurse until she retired early to take care of us. She has a soft heart but a tendency to hover, especially when it comes to her sons, me and Jake. Then there's Jake, my older brother by 3 years. Jake is Jake. He's that guy you see on Facebook who's constantly posting pictures of his family at Disneyland, or proudly talking about how he scored front row seats to a football game. He works in real estate and does pretty well for himself. Married his high school sweetheart, Nicole, and they've got 3 kids. Ava, 7, Ben, 5, and little Eli, 3. Jake's the type who never passes up a chance to talk about how exhausting but rewarding parenting is, like he's living some badge of honor lifestyle. I, on the other hand, took a different path. I work in IT, boring for most people, but it pays well and lets me work from home half the time. Sarah's in marketing, which keeps her super busy, especially during product launches. We've been married for 5 years. For most of that time, our plan was simple: build our careers, save up, and then start a family. Well, that plan hit a brick wall when we found out I couldn't have kids. Sarah held on to hope longer than I did. "Maybe the lab made a mistake," she said after the second test. By the third, though, we both knew it wasn't a mistake. I tried to stay positive, telling myself that adoption or IVF could be options down the line. But Sarah wasn't ready to think about that. She had dreamed of carrying her own child since she was young. We stopped talking about it directly, but the unspoken sadness hung between us like a fog. Things finally came to a head at the family barbecue. My parents are big on gatherings like that, any excuse to bring everyone together with way too much food and bad karaoke. It's tradition. We showed up around mid-afternoon, and the place was buzzing. The backyard smelled of grilled burgers, and the sound of kids laughing echoed around the pool. My mom greeted us with her usual over-enthusiasm, fussing over Sarah like she hadn't seen her in years, even though we were just here for Father's Day a couple of months ago. "Did you eat yet? There's potato salad inside, and Jeff's about to start another batch of burgers," Mom said as she pulled Sarah in for a hug. "Not yet. We'll grab something in a bit," Sarah said with a polite smile. I could tell she wasn't really in the mood, but my mom never notices stuff like that. "Yo, little bro." Jake's voice boomed from across the yard. He was holding a beer in one hand and waving with the other. He made his way over to us, his trademark grin plastered across his face. "Look who finally decided to show up." Fashionably late, as always. "Hey, man," I said, returning the grin with a half-hearted one of my own. "Jake and I get along, mostly. We're not super close, but we keep things civil. He's got that extroverted, larger-than-life vibe that sometimes gets on my nerves, but he doesn't mean any harm. You guys missed the chaos earlier. Ava knocked Eli into the pool trying to catch a football," Jake said with a chuckle. "Kid's fine, but man, he was screaming like it was the end of the world." Sarah gave a polite laugh, but I could see the tension creeping into her shoulders. She excused herself to help my mom in the kitchen, leaving me with Jake. He handed me a beer, and we stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the kids race each other around the yard. "You ever think about having one of your own?" Jake asked casually, nodding toward the kids. It was such a simple question, but it hit like a punch to the gut. I took a long sip of beer to buy myself time. "Yeah, we'll see," I said finally, keeping my voice neutral. I wasn't about to get into it with him here. Jake gave me a look, but didn't press. "Well, if you ever need parenting advice, you know who to call," he said, clapping me on the back. "Not that anyone's fully prepared for it. Half the time, I'm winging it." I forced a chuckle. "I'll keep that in mind." The rest of the afternoon was filled with the usual family banter. My dad grilled way more food than anyone could eat, and my mom made sure everyone's plates were full. Jake's kids ran circles around the adults, burning off endless energy while the rest of us slowly slipped into food comas. It should have been a good time. But for me, every mention of Kid Seavery's story, every joke was like a reminder of what I couldn't have. Later that evening, as we all gathered around the fire pit, my dad decided to play family cheerleader. "You boys better catch up to your cousins," he joked, referring to Tom and Lisa, who had just welcomed their third baby. "We're running out of grandkids to spoil." Jake laughed. "Hey, I'm doing my part. 3 kids and counting." Maybe it's time for this guy to step up, he said, nodding toward me with a grin. I felt the blood rush to my face. Everyone was looking at me. I caught a glimpse of Sarah, her expression tight and strained. She stood abruptly and muttered, "I'm getting a drink," before disappearing inside. The tension was palpable. Did I say something wrong? Jake asked, his grin fading. Nah, don't worry about it, I muttered. It's been a long day. The night dragged on, but it was all a blur. I just wanted to get out of there. On the drive home, Sarah was quiet at first, then she let out a deep sigh. I can't keep doing this, she said, her voice low and raw. Every time we go to these family things, it's like someone's rubbing it in my face, and you just sit there like it doesn't bother you. It does bother me, I said, but the words felt weak even to my own ears. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. No, it doesn't. Not the way it bothers me. You don't understand what it's like to feel like your whole purpose is slipping away. I had no idea how to respond. What could I say that wouldn't sound hollow? All I knew was that we were standing on a breaking point, and I had no clue Tuesday night, the kind where neither of us had the energy to cook, so we ordered takeout. Chinese food or usual go-to when we were too tired to think. I was halfway through my beef and broccoli when Sarah put down her chopsticks and took a deep breath. Hey, I've been thinking about something, she said cautiously, her eyes darting toward me and then away again. I glanced up, swallowing a mouthful of rice. I knew that tone. It was the same one she used when she wanted to bring up something serious, like the time she suggested we move closer to her parents or when she wanted to get a second dog. Spoiler, I vetoed that one. All right, I said, wiping my mouth with a napkin. What's on your mind? She hesitated, playing with the hem of her sweater. So, you know how we've been struggling with the whole baby thing? I tensed immediately. Of course I knew, how could I not? It was a giant invisible weight that had been crushing both of us for months. Yeah, I said slowly. What about it? Well, she began, shifting in her seat. I've been doing some research, and there are options we haven't talked about yet. My stomach tightened. I had a feeling this conversation wasn't heading anywhere good. Options? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Like what, adoption? IVF? Sarah shook her head, biting her lip. No, not exactly. It's about a donor. I froze. A donor? My mind immediately jumped to anonymous sperm donors from some clinic. That wasn't ideal, but it wasn't completely out of left field either. Okay, I said cautiously. You mean from a sperm bank? She hesitated again, and that's when alarm bells really started going off in my head. Not exactly, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was thinking maybe we could ask Jake. I blinked. Sure. I'd misheard her. Wait, what? Jake, she repeated more firmly this time. We could ask him to be a donor. For a moment, I just stared at her, trying to process the absurdity of what she'd just said. Jake, my brother. She wanted my brother to, what, give his sperm so she could carry his baby? My mouth went dry, and I set my fork down slowly. Sarah, are you serious right now? Yes, I'm serious, she said, her tone defensive. Look, I know it's unconventional, but think about it. He's your brother. The baby would still have half your DNA. It wouldn't be like going to a clinic and using some stranger's sperm. This way, the child would still be biologically connected to you. I let out a harsh laugh, though there was nothing funny about this. Are you hearing yourself right now? You want to have my brother's baby and think that's somehow going to be okay with me? She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. I'm not saying I want to have his baby. I'm saying he could help us. It would still be our child. No, Sarah, I snapped. It wouldn't. It would be Jake's kid, my nephew. And you think I'd be able to look at that kid every day and not think about that? You're blowing this way out of proportion, she argued. It's not like I'm asking you to just step aside and let him father a child. We'd be raising the baby together. You'd still be the dad in every way that matters. In every way that matters, I repeated, my voice rising. You don't think biology matters? You think I'd just be cool with that? That I'd be okay knowing my brother is technically the father of my kid? Sarah sighed, clearly frustrated. You're letting your pride get in the way of us having a family. Oh, come on, I shot back. This has nothing to do with pride. It's about boundaries. There's a line, Sarah, and you're asking me to cross it like it's no big deal. You're talking about dragging my brother into this, Jake. Of all people! The guy who's already got 3 kids of his own and spends every family gathering bragging about them like he's dad of the year. She flinched at that, but I didn't care. I was too fired up to stop. Do you really think he'd even agree to something like this? I continued. Hell, do you even realize how weird and uncomfortable this would make things between me and him? Between him and you? I haven't asked him yet, she admitted quietly. Good, I said sharply. Don't. We stared at each other across the table, the air between us charged with tension. Sarah's eyes were glistening, but she didn't cry. She just shook her head slowly. "You're being stubborn," she whispered. "And you're being ridiculous," I countered. The silence stretched out painfully. I pushed my chair back and stood up, pacing around the room to try and collect my thoughts. I couldn't believe we were even having this conversation. "Sarah," I said after a long pause, softening my tone a bit, "I get that this is hard for you. It's hard for me too. But this isn't the solution. We need to find another way. A way that doesn't involve turning my entire family dynamic upside down." She sighed again and leaned her head against her hand. "I just want us to have a chance," she said quietly. "A chance to have the family we've always talked about. And this felt like the closest thing to that." "I want that too," I said, my voice tight. "But not like this. Never like this." We didn't say much else that night. I ended up sleeping on the couch, unable to shake the image of Jake's smug grin from my mind. The idea of him knowing about this conversation, knowing Sarah, had even considered asking him made my skin crawl. I didn't know where we were supposed to go from here. But one thing was clear. This had pushed us into territory I never thought we'd have to navigate. And for the first time since all this started, the next few weeks, I wasn't sure if between me and Sarah went from bad to worse. It was like living with a stranger. We'd go through the motions. "Hey, how was work?" "Fine, how was yours?" But there was no warmth behind it anymore. Just hollow words filling the gaps where real conversations used to be. I'd catch her staring off into space sometimes, her face tight with an expression I couldn't read. And at night she'd lie beside me, scrolling endlessly on her phone until well past midnight. I tried not to let it get to me, but it felt like she was checking out emotionally, piece by piece. The distance was subtle at first. She'd suddenly have to stay late at work more often than usual. The first few times, I didn't think much of either job in marketing could be hectic during product launches. But then it became a pattern. She'd leave early in the morning, get home late, and barely say a word about her day. "Another long night?" I asked one evening as she walked in, dropping her purse by the door. "Yeah," she replied flatly, kicking off her heels. "We've got a big campaign rolling out next week. It's been insane." "Must be," I muttered. I tried to sound casual, but I knew the suspicion was creeping into my voice. Sarah didn't notice her, maybe she did, and just didn't care. She headed straight for the kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat at the counter without even asking how my day was. I watched her for a moment, feeling that familiar knot of frustration tighten in my chest. "Everything all right?" I asked after a long pause. She glanced up at me like she was surprised I was still standing there. "What do you mean?" "You just seem distant lately," I said carefully. "Like you've got a lot on your mind." She sighed, rubbing her temple. "It's just work, okay? I'm under a lot of pressure right now." "Right? Work?" I repeated, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said quickly, backing off. I don't know. It feels like you're not really here, you know?" Sarah rolled her eyes and took a long sip of her wine. "Jesus, here we go," she muttered under her breath. "Here we go? What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "It means every time I'm stressed or tired, you assume there's some hidden problem." She shot back. "Can't I just be overwhelmed with work without it turning into a thing?" "Of course you can," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you've been overwhelmed with work every day for weeks. It's like you're avoiding me." Sarah shook her head, setting her glass down with more force than necessary. "Avoiding you? Really? Maybe I'm just trying to hold it together so I don't lose my mind. Ever think of that?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died on my tongue. This wasn't going anywhere. We were just talking in circles. Both of us too wound up to say anything productive. "Fine," I muttered, throwing up my hands. "Forget I said anything." "Good idea," she snapped, grabbing her glass and heading to the bedroom. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where she'd been, wondering how the hell we'd gotten to this point. The phone call started a few days later. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Sarah had always gotten a lot of work-related calls and texts, so it didn't seem out of the ordinary. But then they started coming late at night, too late for normal business hours. I'd hear her phone buzz at 11 p.m. or midnight, and she'd grab it quickly, stepping out of the room to take the call. One night, around 12:30, her phone buzzed again. I was half asleep, but the sound jerked me awake. Sarah reached for the phone on her nightstand, glanced at the screen, and quietly slipped out of bed. I lay there, listening as her footsteps padded softly down the hall. A few moments later, I heard the faint murmur of her voice from the living room. My mind went into overdrive. Who the hell was calling her at this hour, and why did she feel the need to leave the room to answer it? I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe a coworker from a different time zone, or an urgent client issue, but deep down, I didn't believe that. Sarah had never been this secretive before. Something was definitely off. The next morning, I decided to confront her urgently. At first, So you were up late again last night, I said over breakfast, keeping my tone light. Work call? Sarah barely looked up from her coffee. Yeah, just some last-minute stuff with the campaign. Must have been important, I said, trying to read her expression. It's not every day you get calls at midnight. She shrugged. Like I said, things are crazy right now. I can't control when people reach out. I nodded slowly, not buying a word of it. You know you can talk to me if something's going on, right? She finally looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. Why are you acting like I'm hiding something? I'm not, I said quickly. I don't know. It feels like there's more to this than you're letting on. Sarah sighed heavily, setting her mug down with a clink. For the last time, it's just work, okay? Not everything has to be a conspiracy. I wanted to push further, to demand answers, but I could tell she was on the edge of snapping. And honestly, I was tired of fighting. All right, I said quietly. If you say so. But I didn't believe her. Not for a second. Over the next few days, the tension in our house became unbearable. We barely spoke except for the bare minimum. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? What's for dinner? Like we were two roommates sharing a space instead of a married couple. One night, after she came home late again, I finally reached my breaking point. I waited until she had changed out of her work clothes and sat down in front of the television. Sarah, I said, standing in the doorway, we need to talk. She sighed, not even looking at me. Can it wait? I'm exhausted. No, I said firmly. It can't. I can't keep doing this. Doing what? She asked, finally turning to face me. This, pretending everything's fine when it's not. You're distant, secretive, and you're constantly taking calls at weird hours. I feel like I'm losing you. Sarah's face softened for a moment, but then she shook her head. You're not losing me. You're just overthinking everything. Am I? I challenged. Because it doesn't feel that way. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the television screen like she was trying to avoid my gaze. I'm tired, she whispered after a long pause. Tired of fighting. Tired of feeling like I'm under a microscope. And I'm tired of feeling like I don't matter to you anymore. I shot back. Sarah flinched slightly but didn't argue. We were at an impasse, neither of us willing to give ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Eventually, she stood up and walked past me without a word, retreating to the bedroom. I stayed behind, sinking onto the couch and burying my face in my hands. Whatever was going on between us, it wasn't sustainable. Something had to give. In a haze of late nights, strained conversations, and emotional walls I couldn't break down. I had stopped confronting Sarah about her behavior. Every argument just ended the same way, with her getting defensive, me feeling exhausted, and neither of us saying anything meaningful for days. It was like we were both waiting for something to snap. And then, one morning, it did. I was in the kitchen, brewing coffee before work. Sarah had come out of the bedroom, still in her oversized sleep shirt. She walked over to grab a mug, and for the first time in weeks, I really looked at her. She had gained some weight, not a lot, but enough that her shirt fit differently. There was a distinct curve to her midsection, something I hadn't noticed before. I tried to brush it off as stress eating. She had been under a lot of pressure after all. But the more I stared, the less sense that explanation made. It wasn't just weight, it was the kind of roundness that looked deliberate. My chest tightened as a sickening thought crept into my mind. Number it couldn't be. I watched her pour coffee, acting like nothing was out of the ordinary. You want cream? She asked casually, as if I wasn't standing there, frozen in place with 100 questions spinning in my head. No, I said, my voice coming out hoarse. I cleared my throat and tried again. Sarah, are you feeling all right? She glanced at me over her shoulder. Yeah, why? I hesitated, not sure how to phrase it without sounding insane. You look different, I said slowly. Have you noticed anything? Like any changes in your body? Sarah stiffened slightly but kept her back to me. I don't know what you mean. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Come on, Sarah. You've been acting weird for months. You've been secretive, staying out late. And now, look at yourself. I gestured vaguely at her stomach. She set the coffee pot down with a loud clink and turned to face me, crossing her arms over her chest. What exactly are you trying to say, Matt? I'm saying it looks like you might be pregnant, I said bluntly. The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but there was no other way to say it. And if that's the case, I think I deserve an explanation. Her eyes widened in shock, and for a split second, I thought she might deny it outright. But instead, she deflated like a balloon, her shoulders slumping as tears welled in her eyes. Matt, she whispered, her voice cracking. Don't, I said quickly, holding up a hand. Don't try to dance around this. Just tell me the truth. Are you pregnant? She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. My mind went blank. every thought drowned out by a roaring in my ears. How? I finally managed to choke out. How is that even possible? Sarah wiped at her face, sniffling. Matt, I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared. I thought maybe I could hide it a little longer, that we'd figure it out together. Figure what out? I snapped, anger rising in my chest like wildfire. You went behind my back. You're pregnant, Sarah. I need you to tell me exactly how this happened. She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip like she was stalling for time. I took a step forward, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, not in rage. But to keep from shaking, was it Jake? I asked suddenly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. The thought had haunted me ever since she brought up the idea of him being a donor. Did you go to him after I said no? Her eyes widened in horror. What? No. God, no. It's not Jake. Then who? I demanded. You owe me that much. Sarah's gaze dropped to the floor, her voice barely above a whisper. I found someone else. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. You what? It wasn't planned, she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. After you said no to the donor idea, I didn't know what to do. I felt so lost, Matt. I couldn't stop thinking about how much I wanted a baby, needed a baby. And then, I met someone. Someone, I repeated numbly. You cheated on me. I didn't think of it like that, she said, tears streaming freely now. I thought, Matt, I was desperate. I was hurting, and I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. You kept shutting me out. Oh, so this is my fault now? I barked out a bitter laugh. You couldn't talk to me, so you decided the best solution was to sleep with someone else? And what hope I wouldn't notice when you started showing? It wasn't like that, she pleaded. It wasn't about love or anything. It was just, I needed a way to have a child. I thought maybe it would fix everything between us. I stared at her, feeling a wave of cold disgust settle over me. Fix everything? I echoed. Sarah, you just blew up our entire marriage. Do you get that? You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now you're standing here trying to justify it? She shook her head desperately. I'm not trying to justify it. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But please, please don't walk away from me. We can still make this work. Make this work? I repeated incredulously. You think there's any coming back from this? I'm willing to do whatever it takes, she whispered. I can't lose you, Matt, please. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. Everything we'd built together, every moment of trust and love, it was all crumbling before my eyes. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had inflicted on me. Instead, I just shook my head slowly. I need some air, I muttered, turning on my heel and heading for the front door. Matt, wait. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I stepped outside and slammed the door behind me, gulping down the cold air like it could somehow cleanse the burning rage inside me. I stood on the porch for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of the wreckage that was now my life. I had no idea what to do next, but one thing was certain. Go back inside nothing would ever be. I just sat on the porch, numb, replaying the conversation over and over in my head like a broken record. Sarah was pregnant with someone else's baby. The weight of those words crushed me, leaving me hollow. Every time I tried to make sense of it, my mind just circled back to the same question. How the hell did we end up here? Around 2 a.m., I finally stood up and walked to my car. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out of there. I drove aimlessly for an hour, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot and just sat there, staring at the dark horizon. The silence was deafening. I don't know how long I stayed in that parking lot, but by the time I got back home, it was almost dawn. The house was quiet, and Sarah had locked herself in the bedroom. Fine by me. I wasn't ready to face her anyway. I crashed on the couch and slept fitfully, my dreams haunted by fragmented images of her confession. The next few days were a blur. I called in sick to work, couldn't exactly focus on debugging code when my entire life had just imploded. Sarah tried to talk to me a few times, but I wasn't having it. I'd walk out of the room or give her curt, one-word answers until she eventually stopped trying. I spent a lot of time scrolling through my phone, mindlessly refreshing apps, hoping for some kind of distraction. That's when I found myself on a Reddit thread about relationships. People were sharing stories of betrayal, heartbreak, and rebuilding their lives. It was weirdly comforting knowing I wasn't the only one going through this kind of crap. Before I knew it, I was typing out my own post on a throwaway account. Title, My wife is pregnant, but the child isn't mine. My wife and I have been struggling with infertility for a while now. We got the devastating news a few months ago that I'm unable to have children. It's been tough on both of us, but I thought we were in it together. Recently, she confessed that she cheated on me and is now pregnant. She claims it wasn't about love and that she was just desperate to have a baby. I feel completely blindsided and betrayed. I don't know how to move forward from this. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back, but another part of me wonders if it's possible to repair the damage. Has anyone been through something similar? How do you even begin to trust someone after something like this? I hit post and stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Within minutes, the replies started rolling in. Some people were sympathetic, sharing their own experiences with infidelity. Others were blunt, telling me to cut my losses and leave. A few questioned if I was in denial, whether deep down I already knew the answer and was just looking for validation. One comment stuck with me. You need to decide what peace looks like for you. Staying and trying to fix things might be harder than leaving. But if you leave, make sure it's because it's what you truly want, not because you're running from the pain. I closed the app and leaned back on the couch, letting those words sink in. What did peace look like for me? Would it be walking away from Sarah and starting over? Or would it be staying and trying to rebuild the trust she had shattered? Both options felt impossible in different ways. The next day, Sarah finally cornered me in the living room. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her face pale and drawn. Matt, she began softly, we can't keep living like this. We need to talk. I didn't say anything, just crossed my arms and waited for her to continue. I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I know I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. I was selfish and scared, and I made the worst mistake of my life. But I love you. I still love you. And I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I let out a bitter laugh. Make it right? How do you make right something like this? You slept with another man and got pregnant, Sarah. That's not exactly a fixable screw-up. I know, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. But I don't want to lose you. Please tell me what you need. I'll do anything. I stared at her, torn between the anger still simmering in my chest and the ghost of the love we used to share. I wanted to scream at her, to lash out and make her feel the same pain she'd inflicted on me. But another part of me just felt tired. I don't know what I need, I said quietly. I really don't. Sarah nodded slowly, wiping her tears. Take your time, she said. I'll give you space if that's what you need. But please, just don't shut me out completely. I can't make any promises, I replied. The following weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. Some days, I felt like I could maybe see a path forward. Other days, the anger and betrayal hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me gasping for air. I kept going back to that Reddit thread, reading the advice and stories from strangers who'd survived similar situations. One night, I sat on the porch, staring up at the stars. I thought about the life Sarah and I had dreamed of, the kids, the house, the growing old together. That dream was gone now, or at least irrevocably altered. But maybe that didn't mean my entire future had to be ruined. Maybe I could build something new, whether it was with Sarah or without her. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a small spark of hope. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this define me. Whatever came next, I was going to take it one day at a time. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Could you ever forgive something like this, or would you walk away? I need your thoughts. Comment below.